Join me in this story to discover the plan for the most elaborate, heartwarming, and romantic Christmas surprise ever told. Because sometimes love isn't just about the grand gestures everyone sees on social media. Sometimes it's about the quiet, desperate need to save the person you love from the noise of the world. Imagine that your partner doesn't just gift you a weekend getaway, but a carefully crafted treasure hunt designed specifically to heal your deepest fears and silence the overwhelming expectations of family and society. It was the night of December 20th in the bustling city of Hollyridge. Outside the window, winter had deployed its full arsenal, a dense, relentless, silent snowfall was busy covering the slate roofs in white and turning the gas street lamps into diffuse, hazy halos of orange light against the dark sky. The city sounded muffled, distant, as if wrapped in cotton wool. But inside Rachel and James's elegant, high-ceilinged apartment, the atmosphere was starkly different. The air wasn't peaceful. It was charged with static, that sharp, nervous electricity that always precedes total emotional exhaustion. Rachel let out a sigh that started deep in her chest and ended as a trembling vibration in the vastness of the living room. At 42, Rachel was a woman who had meticulously built her life on pillars of serenity, order, and beauty. She was a successful writer of children's books, used to weaving happy endings for others where problems were solved with magic dust. But lately, staring into the antique mirror in the hallway, the woman looking back had tired eyes, shadowed with fatigue, and a stubborn wrinkle of worry between her brows that not even the dim, flattering light of the expensive vanilla candles could soften. Before we continue with this story, just a quick reminder that if you enjoy cozy romantic stories, you can listen to at a relaxed pace, you can subscribe. So there will always be a new story waiting for you? She stood in the center of the room, her feet aching. She held in front of her body with the padded hanger still attached. The wedding dress her mother and Aunt Muriel insisted was appropriate and dignified for a woman of her standing. It was a monster, a behemoth of nuclear white tulle, stiff and scratchy, with far too much Victorian lace that felt itchy even just looking at it, and absolutely zero personality. It was a dress that shouted tradition but whispered discomfort and hiding. Rachel thought, staring critically at her reflection, tilting her head to the side. I look like a giant meringue about to expire. Or worse, a Christmas tree ornament that went terribly wrong in the factory and was rejected by quality control. Why do I have to wear this? I have hips. I have a waist. I have 42 years of life experience written on my skin. I want silk. I want fabric that falls like water and feels like a caress. I want to feel like a woman, not a costume for a bridal magazine layout that doesn't represent me. I feel like I'm playing a role in a play I didn't write. With a groan of frustration that echoed in the quiet room, she threw the dress onto the emerald green velvet sofa. It landed with a soft whoosh, bouncing like a cloud of white disappointment. She turned her back on it. The coffee table, usually a curated display of art books and architectural magazines, was currently invisible. It was buried under mountains of glossy flower catalogs featuring arrangements she couldn't afford to care about. Linen samples debating endlessly between eggshell white or cloud white. As if anyone actually cared about the difference while eating chicken, and the dreaded, ever-growing guest list that seemed to spawn new names overnight. Cousin Herbert from Ohio? I haven't seen him since I was 12, she muttered to herself. There was a beautiful Advent wreath on the table, a masterpiece she had made herself from real fir branches, dried orange slices, and cinnamon sticks. It smelled faintly of citrus and forest, a scent she usually loved, but Rachel hadn't even had the time to light the third candle. The wax was cold and untouched. The season was slipping away from her, buried under logistics and obligations. The age difference between them, those 10 years that, in the privacy of their home, in the warmth of their bed, were invisible, irrelevant as the wall color had become a constant, buzzing topic of conversation in their social circle. She heard the whispers, she saw the looks. Rachel felt the pressure settling like a cold weight at the base of her neck, a tension headache that never quite went away. A suffocating pressure to prove their relationship was serious, to prove it wasn't a mature woman's midlife crisis or a handsome young man's passing fling. She felt she needed a perfect, expensive, flawless wedding to validate her love before the world's critical, watching eyes. She looked down at her left hand. The engagement ring, a stunning 1920 Art Deco piece with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, sparkled under the light of the Tiffany lamp. It was beautiful. It was pure James, structured yet organic, just like the gardens he designed, unique with history, elegant, distinct. But right now, tonight, that ring weighed like a stone slab on her finger, dragging her hand down. She looked down at her left hand. The engagement ring, a stunning 1920 Art Deco piece with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, sparkled under the light of the Tiffany lamp. It was beautiful. It was pure James, structured yet organic, just like the gardens he designed, unique with history, elegant, distinct. But right now, tonight, that ring weighed like a stone slab on her finger, dragging her hand down. At that precise moment, the metallic sound of a key turning in the lock cut through the room's dense air. Click, clack. The solid oak door opened with a heavy creak. A gust of freezing air rushed into the warm living room, bringing with it the smell of clean snow, ozone, and the smoky scent of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors below. James entered. At 32, James possessed a vitality that was sometimes overwhelming, but always welcome. He took off his wool beanie, revealing messy brown hair, speckled with snowflakes that were melting quickly into glistening droplets in the warmth of the home. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, contrasting with the mischievous twinkle in his green eyes that usually held a joke or a promise. He shook his coat, sending a spray of water droplets onto the floor. Barnaby, the elderly golden retriever who had been snoring rhythmically at Rachel's feet, lifted his heavy golden head. He sniffed the cold, crisp air James brought in, his black nose twitching. He recognized his favorite human and thumped his tail against the wooden floorboards. Thump, 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 too comfortable to actually get up, but happy nonetheless. "Hello, my favorite writer," James said. His voice was deep, warm, an instant balm for Rachel's frayed nerves, wrapping around her like a blanket. He kicked off his boots, leaving them by the door. Rachel tried to smile, but she felt the muscles of her face tense up, resisting the joy. "Hello," she replied, her voice tight and higher than usual, betraying her stress. "Your mother called 3 times. She left voicemails. She wants to know if the string quartet can play classic carols, or if we prefer jazz, or if jazz is too modern and disrespectful for the venue she picked out. She also mentioned something about the napkins being the wrong shade of cream." James didn't answer immediately. He walked toward her, dodging boxes of invitations with the agility of someone used to navigating chaos. He stopped in front of her, ignoring the mess on the table, ignoring the tulle monstrosity on the sofa. He looked only at her. He took her firmly by the waist, his large hands grounding her, pulling her soft, curvy body against his. He was cold from the street, his jacket radiating a chill, but underneath he radiated a solid internal heat. He buried his nose in the crook of Rachel's neck, inhaling her perfume vanilla and amber mixed with the stale smell of old paper. "We are not going to talk about string quartets," he murmured against her skin, his breath warm, causing a shiver to run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "In fact, we aren't going to talk about anything. Not the menu, not the ants, not the linens, not the seating chart." Rachel pulled back slightly to look him in the eye, confused by his firmness. What do you mean?" "We have deadlines, James." James reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a bill or a contract. It was sealed with heavy red wax, stamped with a design she didn't recognize, a compass. "Rachel Vance," he said. Although they weren't legally Vance yet, he loved calling her that in the privacy of their home. Like a whispered promise of the future, a secret they shared. "Your mission, should you choose to accept it, starts right now." "Mission? James, I have the menu tasting tomorrow at 9. And the florist is coming at 11 to discuss the centerpieces." "Read the envelope," he insisted, his smile soft but unyielding, his eyes sparkling with a secret he was dying to tell. Rachel, intrigued and feeling her heart start to beat a little faster, broke the wax seal. The paper crunched satisfyingly under her fingers, a sharp sound in the quiet room. Inside was a note written in James's angular, architectural handwriting. "Clue number 1. The noise of the city drowns out what your heart is screaming. The first piece of treasure isn't here. It's where the trees touch the sky and the air smells of burning wood. Pack a small bag. Pack your thickest wool sweaters, your prettiest underwear, and your snow boots. You have 30 minutes. The carriage awaits. Rachel looked up, her lips parted in shock, the note trembling slightly in her hand. Are you kidnapping me? James smiled, and it was a dazzling smile full of mischief and love. I am rescuing you, Rachel. Mark is handling the studio. Your editor knows you've disappeared for a creative emergency, and Barnaby is coming with us. I've packed his favorite toy. Rachel thought, her mind racing. Run away? Just leave? Leave the tulle, the judgment, the lists, and the stress to hide with this wonderful man in the middle of nowhere. Can I do that? Am I allowed to just stop? Oh, yes, please. Take me away from this madness. I'll be ready in 10 minutes, she said, and for the first time in weeks, her blue eyes truly sparkled with life, the gray fatigue lifting like fog. The journey north was a slow and necessary decompression. As the city lights faded behind them, turning from bright, aggressive glares to distant stars in the rearview mirror, James drove his classic Land Rover, a vehicle that smelled of old leather, engine oil, and adventure, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other firmly interlaced with Rachel's over the center console. A soft, instrumental jazz version of White Christmas played through the speakers, the saxophone filling the car with nostalgia and calm. Outside, the world was a blur of white and black. The snow was falling harder now, hypnotic in the headlights, rushing towards them like stars in hyperspace. Inside, it was warm and safe. Rachel watched the windshield wipers move back and forth, swish, swish, each swipe erasing a little more of her anxiety. She rested her head back and closed her eyes, letting the vibration of the engine soothe her. 3 hours later, the car slowed down. They turned onto a private forest road. The headlights illuminated snow-laden pines that formed a white tunnel around them, their branches heavy and bowing low under the weight of the snow. It felt like entering a different dimension, a Narnia of their own. The road was bumpy, but James navigated it with ease. And then the trees cleared and they arrived. The Glass Haven. It was a vision straight out of a storybook. A sturdy cabin made of river stone and dark wood, solid and protective against the elements, with a column of white smoke rising steadily from the chimney into the night sky, promising warmth within. On the heavy wooden front door, a huge, rustic Christmas wreath made of dried orange slices, cinnamon sticks, and large pine cones welcomed them, dusted with fresh snow. But the most impressive feature, the one that made Rachel gasp, was the enormous Victorian conservatory attached to the side of the house. It wasn't dark. It glowed in the night like a magic lantern, filled with lush green plants and hundreds of golden fairy lights reflecting off the glass panes against the snow. My God, James. Rachel whispered, her breath fogging up the window. Is this real? They got out of the car. The silence was absolute, heavy, and beautiful. The air smelled intensely of pine, resin, and clean, sharp cold that woke up every cell in her body. Barnaby jumped down, sank into the snow up to his belly, and shook himself off happily, barking at a snowflake, delighted to be in the wild. They walked to the door, the fresh snow crunching loudly under their boots. James unlocked the door with an old iron key. They entered the cabin. The heat received them like a physical hug. It smelled of applewood burning in the grate, clove, furniture wax, and home. The interior was a dream of textures meant to comfort. Worn Persian rugs covered the wooden floors in deep reds and blues. Thick leather sofas were piled high with red and green tartan cushions. The fire was already roaring. James must have arranged for someone to light it. Christmas decoration. And there, on the stone fireplace mantel, caught in the flickering light, was a detail that made Rachel's heart swell. James had already hung 2 thick, knitted wool stockings, one embroidered with an R in gold thread and the other with a J and a smaller one, filled with dog treats for Barnaby. James took off Rachel's coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders, caressing the soft wool of her sweater. He leaned in close. "Welcome to the stress-free zone," he said softly, looking around the room he had prepared. "There's no cell reception here, just us, the snow, and real Christmas. No one can reach us." Rachel looked at the stockings on the fireplace and felt a lump form in her throat. The simplicity of it, the care in the details, overwhelmed her more than any grand gesture or expensive centerpiece. "And the treasure?" she asked, looking back at him. The note said ... The hunt starts tomorrow, he interrupted, kissing her forehead gently. Tonight, just rest. Let me take care of you. Let's just listen to the fire and drink wine. Rachel woke the next morning not to the jarring sound of an alarm clock, but to the pure, blinding white light of the snow filtering through the thick linen curtains. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then the smell of wood smoke and old pine brought it all back. She stretched her limbs, feeling the luxury of the high thread count sheets against her legs. She reached out her hand. The bed beside her was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. But the pillow still held the deep indent of James's head and the faint, comforting scent of his sandalwood shampoo. Resting right in the center of his pillow, demanding attention, was another wax-sealed envelope. Rachel sat up, brushing her messy blonde hair out of her face. She felt a bubble of childish excitement rise in her chest. Feeling she hadn't experienced since she was a little girl waiting for Santa, she picked up the envelope. The wax seal was red, imprinted with a small tree this time. She broke it. Clue number 2. Before looking to the future, one must honor the past. To build a castle, you first need to respect the stones of the foundation. Look where the fire warms the feet. There you will find the memory of the exact moment I knew it was you. Don't look for big, shiny things, Rachel. Look for the details, Rachel thought, smiling to herself. Where the fire warms the feet. The fireplace, of course. That man and his obsession with fire. She slipped out of bed. The wooden floor was cold, so she put on the champagne-colored silk robe she had brought, just in case. It felt cool against her skin like liquid water, then quickly warmed to her body heat. She tied the sash around her waist and went down the wooden stairs barefoot, the wood smooth and creaky under her feet. The cabin was alive. In the living room, the fire was already crackling happily, freshly fed with birch logs that popped and hissed. James was in the kitchen. She could hear the clinking of spoons and the smell of fresh coffee. Fried bacon and cinnamon toast filled the entire house, making her stomach rumble with anticipation. But Rachel went straight to the large stone mantelpiece. There, nestled between the wool stockings and a garland of holly, sat a small, intricately carved wooden box. It looked old, maybe something he had found in an antique shop. Rachel opened it with trembling hands. Inside wasn't a diamond or gold. It was a pressed, dried flower, a simple wild poppy, its petals faded to a translucent papery pink in a Polaroid photo. She picked up the photo. It was of their first date 5 years ago. They had gone for a picnic in the meadows outside the city. In the picture, Rachel wasn't posing. She wasn't sucking in her stomach or tilting her head to the good side. She was laughing out loud. Head thrown back, mouth open, completely unguarded, her eyes crinkled with pure, unadulterated joy. It was a picture of a woman who felt free. James appeared behind her. She hadn't heard him approach over the crackle of the fire. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He smelled of coffee, soap, and morning warmth. "That poppy," he whispered into her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. "You picked it that day, do you remember? You held it up to the sun and said you liked it because it was imperfect. You said roses try too hard, but poppies are wild and ephemeral. You said beauty doesn't have to last forever to be valuable." Rachel leaned back into him, tears pricking her eyes, blurring the photo in her hand. "I thought you threw it away," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought it was just a weed to you. I thought I was just a phase to you back then." He turned her around gently so she was facing him. His green eyes were serious, intense. "Nothing about you is a weed to me, Rachel. I keep everything. I have the ticket stubs from our first movie. I have the napkin where you wrote down your phone number. Because that day, seeing you laugh like that, so free, I knew. I knew I didn't care about the age gap. I knew I didn't care about what my friends or your friends would say. I knew I wanted to be the reason for that laughter for the rest of my life. That is the foundation, Rachel. Not the wedding venue. Not the caterer. Us." Rachel looked up at him. She saw the gray hairs starting to appear at his temples. She saw the love in his face. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, a kiss tasting of coffee, morning warmth, and promises kept. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you more," he replied. "Now come, breakfast is ready. and we have a whole day of absolutely nothing ahead of us. Evening fell early over the forest, wrapping the world in a deep indigo twilight. Outside, a blizzard was raging. The wind howled around the corners of the cabin, painting the windows white with frost and snow. But inside, it was the coziest, safest place on earth. James walked over to the vintage record player in the corner. He selected a vinyl disc with care and lowered the needle. The crackle of static was followed by the smooth, velvet voice of Frank Sinatra singing the Christmas waltz. "Let's honor tradition," James said, walking into the kitchen and pulling out a bag of flour, a jar of sticky molasses, and tins of powdered ginger and cloves. They spent the afternoon baking gingerbread cookies. The kitchen, usually pristine, became a chaotic playground. Clouds of white flour drifted in the air like indoor snow. The air grew heavy and intoxicating with the spicy, sweet scent of holiday spices, sharp ginger, warm clove, nutmeg, and woody cinnamon. Rachel, wearing one of James's oversized cable-knit sweaters that hung off one shoulder, was laughing. She was trying to decorate a dog-shaped cookie that vaguely resembled Barnaby, but the icing bag exploded, covering her hands in white sugar. James stopped what he was doing. He put down the rolling pin. He looked at her across the island counter.
He had a smudge of flour on his cheek, which made him look boyish and charming, but the look in his eyes was all man.
"You look beautiful like this," James said suddenly. His voice was lower, rougher. Rachel looked down at her messy sweater. "I'm a mess, James. I'm covered in flour and I'm wearing your old clothes." He walked around the counter. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her, invading her space in the best way possible. "You're beautiful," he repeated, emphasizing each word. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her lips, then traveled slowly down to the curve of her neck, exposed by the sweater, and lower to the swell of her hips. The record changed tracks. A slow, sultry saxophone melody filled the room. James wiped his hands on a towel and reached for her. He took her by the waist, his thumbs pressing firmly into her softness. They began to dance slowly in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of baking cookies and the warmth of the oven. James kissed her. A kiss that started sweet tasting of sugar and spice and turned deep, hungry, desperate. He lifted her easily onto the kitchen counter, stepping between her legs. His hands found the warmth of her thighs through the fabric of her leggings. "I love every inch of you," he murmured against her neck, his lips hot against her skin. He kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Your curves ... door laugh ... Your smell of vanilla and now ginger. I want to eat you up." Rachel wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer. All her insecurities about her age, about the gravity affecting her body, about not being 20 anymore, evaporated under the heat of his touch. He didn't just want her, he worshipped her. He stopped kissing her for a second and looked her in the eyes. "Let's go to the fire," he whispered. He carried her to the living room, not breaking eye contact. He laid her down on the thick faux fur rug in front of the roaring fire. The overhead lights were off. The only light came from the dancing flames, painting their skin in shades of gold, amber, and bronze. There, protected from the storm raging outside, time seemed to stop. James undressed her with reverence, treating her body like the treasure it was. When he looked at her naked form in the firelight, his expression was one of awe. Rachel thought, "He looks at me like I am a masterpiece. Why was I trying to hide under layers of tulle? Why was I ashamed?" He traced her stretch marks with his fingers as if they were lines on a map leading him home. He kissed every year of her life written on her skin. They loved each other with the calm intensity of two people who know they have found their other half. It wasn't rushed. It was a slow, deliberate affirmation of belonging. The wind howled. Inside, there were only soft sighs, the friction of skin against skin, and the feeling of complete and utter safety. Rachel thought, losing herself in the sensation of his weight and warmth. If this is what Christmas feels like, I want it to be December all year round. I never want to leave this rug. I never want to go back to being a stressed Bridezilla. I just want to be Rachel here with him. The morning of December 23rd found them in a state of suspended reality, far removed from the frantic pace of the city and the wedding planning. They decided to have a late, lazy breakfast in the Victorian conservatory attached to the cabin. It was a surreal, almost magical experience, directly above their heads, Heavy white snow was piling up on the glass roof, blocking out the gray sky and insulating them from the world. But inside the glass walls, they were wrapped in a humid, tropical warmth, surrounded by giant ferns, monstera leaves, and blooming jasmine that perfumed the air. Rachel sat at the wrought iron bistro table, wearing one of James's thick wool sweaters over her silk pajamas and thick wool socks. She held a mug of steaming coffee with both hands, feeling the heat seep into her palms. They ate fresh croissants, fruit, and yogurt in a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with idle chatter about weather or politics. James, who was reading a vintage botany book with worn pages, looked up over the rim of his reading glasses. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made Rachel's heart skip a beat. He pointed with his pen to a spectacular white orchid in the center of the table, its petals cascading like a waterfall of porcelain. "I think that plant has something for you," he said, winking a green eye. Rachel put down her mug and leaned in. She searched gently among the fleshy green leaves and the moss at the base of the plant. There, tucked away near the roots, was the third wax-sealed envelope. The ritual was becoming her favorite moment of the day, an addiction to his words. She broke the red seal with impatient fingers. Clue number 3, the present is the only time we truly possess. But to build something solid, something that withstands the storms of life, we need direction. We need to know where we are going when the map gets blurry. Look in the library, behind the stories of immortal love. There you will find the compass that guides us. Rachel thought, immortal love ... the library. It has to be Jane Austen. James knows my vintage edition of Pride and Prejudice is sacred territory. He knows I read it every winter when I need to believe in happy endings. Rachel stood up, her sock-clad feet padding softly against the tile floor of the conservatory before hitting the wood of the living room. She ran to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that covered the east wall. She scanned the spines until she found the worn, leather-bound collection of classics. There it was, Pride and Prejudice. She pulled the book out. Behind it, hidden in the shadows of the shelf, was a heavy, square brass nautical box. It felt cold and substantial in her hands. She sat on the floor, crossing her legs to open it. Inside, resting on black velvet, sat an antique navigation compass. It was beautiful, polished by time, its glass face clear. The needle floated steadily, always seeking true north regardless of how she turned the box. She turned it over. On the back of the brass case, an inscription was engraved in elegant script. "You are my north, always." Rachel pressed the cold brass against her chest, right over her heart. The emotion rose in her throat, thick and sweet. It wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration. A promise of stability in a chaotic world. James appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his coffee mug, watching her with an expression of quiet, profound love. "I've wanted to give you that for years," he said softly. "Because before you, Rachel, I was lost. I had maps. I had plans, blueprints, career goals, but I had no direction. I was just moving through life. You gave me a destination." He walked over, sat on the floor beside her, and kissed her forehead. "Prepare yourself, my love," he whispered. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and tomorrow ... Tomorrow you will find the final treasure. The real reason I brought you here." Christmas Eve afternoon fell over the forest like a heavy blue velvet curtain. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world perfectly still and silent. The air smelled intensely of pine needles, wood smoke, and impending magic. At 6 o'clock in the evening, James entered the bedroom where Rachel was reading by the window.
He was carrying a large rectangular white box, tied with a luxurious emerald green satin ribbon. He looked different tonight.
His hair was neatly combed and his cheeks were pale. Rachel noticed a slight tremor in his hands that were usually steady as a surgeon's, that she had never seen before. "The last clue requires appropriate attire," he said, a shy, almost boyish smile on his lips. "I would like you to wear this. And please come down to the conservatory at 7 o'clock sharp, not a minute before, not a minute after. Trust me." He placed the box gently on the bed and left the room, taking Barnaby with him. The dog seemed strangely excited, his tail wagging a mile a minute, wearing a festive bandana. James closed the door softly, leaving Rachel alone with the ticking of the clock and the thumping of her own heart. Rachel stood up and approached the bed. She pulled the green ribbon, and it unraveled with a silky whisper. She lifted the lid. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the meringue dress. It wasn't the stiff, scratchy tulle monstrosity that made her feel like a fraud back in the city. It was liquid silk, a champagne-colored dress, cut on the bias in a 1930s Hollywood glamour style. It was elegant, sophisticated, and deeply sensual. It had long sleeves to ward off the chill, a plunging back, and a drape that promised to hug every curve without constricting them. It was a dress for a real woman, not a girl playing pretend. Next to it lay a soft white faux fur stole, luxurious as a cloud, and a pair of vintage-style jeweled shoes that sparkled in the lamplight. Rachel ran her hand over the cold silk. James hadn't just listened to her complaints. He had seen her. He understood who she was when the noise of the world fell away. She dressed slowly, savoring the ritual. The silk slid over her skin like cool water, warming instantly to her body heat. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been molded to her form. She sat at the vanity and brushed her hair until the blonde waves shone like gold. She painted her lips a deep, classic red, a bold color she hadn't dared to wear in months. She stood before the full-length mirror. For the first time in a long time, she recognized the woman staring back. She didn't see a stressed 42-year-old bride trying to please her mother. She saw Rachel. She saw a woman in love, beautiful, powerful, and ready. Rachel thought, "This is me. This is the woman James loves. And tonight I feel like her again." At 7 o'clock, the heavy grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, the sound deep and resonant, marking the moment. Rachel picked up the engraved compass, clutching it in her hand like a talisman, and opened the bedroom door. She walked down the wooden stairs, the house silent and dim. She reached the front door and stepped out onto the porch. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The world had transformed. While she was getting ready, James had been busy. He had created a path of hundreds of candles inside mason jars, winding through the snow from the cabin porch all the way to the conservatory entrance. It looked like a river of liquid fire cutting through the darkness of the winter night. The snow reflected the glow, creating a golden aura around the path. At the end of the path, the conservatory glowed brighter than ever, a beacon of warmth against the freezing night. With her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Rachel began to walk. The fresh snow crunched under her boots, a satisfying sound in the silence. The cold air nipped at her cheeks, but she didn't feel it. She felt she was walking toward her destiny, toward the center of her life. She reached the conservatory door. The glass panes were fogged up by the heat inside, hiding the secrets within. She put her hand on the cold brass knob. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of winter, closed her eyes for a second to thank the universe, and opened the door. The blast of heat that hit Rachel when she crossed the threshold was thick, humid, and intoxicating. It didn't smell like a normal room. It smelled like a secret garden in the middle of winter. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth, blooming jasmine, freshly cut balsam for branches, and the sweet honeyed aroma of thousands of beeswax candles burning at once. Rachel blinked, her eyes adjusting to the golden glow. She didn't look at the exotic ferns or the hanging orchids that James had tended with such care. Her blue eyes, bright with unshed tears, locked directly onto the end of the natural aisle formed by the lush greenery. There was James. He was standing under a rustic wooden arch that he must have built himself, decorated with holly, pine cones, and white winter roses. He wore a midnight blue suit, tailored to perfection, that made his shoulders look broad and capable. He was pale, visibly nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. But the moment his green eyes met hers, all the tension in his face broke. A smile of pure, unadulterated relief and love washed over him. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide, shining under the fairy lights like glass. Beside him stood an older man with a kind face and a white beard, holding a small leather book. Mr. Abernathy, the owner of the property and, as Rachel now realized, a justice of the peace, and sitting with comic dignity by his side was Barnaby. The old golden retriever was wearing a pair of felt reindeer antlers and a green velvet boatie, wagging his tail and thumping the floor rhythmically upon seeing his owner. Rachel brought her hands to her mouth to stifle a sob of happiness that bubbled up from her chest. James ... she whispered, her voice trembling. She felt her legs shaking as she began to walk slowly down the Persian rug he had laid out over the conservatory floor. James took a step forward, unable to wait for her to reach the altar. He met her halfway. He took her hands in his. His grip was warm, firm, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. James took a step forward, unable to wait for her to reach the altar. He met her halfway. He took her hands in his. His grip was warm, firm, an anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Rachel," he said, and his voice resonated clear and deep in the glass silence of the conservatory. "The last clue is this. You told me that horrible night in the living room surrounded by lists and stress, that the wedding was stealing your joy. You told me you hated the spectacle. You told me that the only thing you wanted, in the bottom of your heart, was to be married to me, to be my wife." He squeezed her hands tight, pulling her imperceptibly closer. "So I canceled the spring wedding. I canceled the noise, the opinions, the string quartets, and the expectations. And I brought the wedding here to our refuge on our Christmas Eve. No audience, no Aunt Muriel. Just us, the snow, and the dog. Rachel, do you want to marry me tonight? Here and now?" So I canceled the spring wedding. I canceled the noise, the opinions, the string quartets, and the expectations. And I brought the wedding here to our refuge on our Christmas Eve. No audience, no Aunt Muriel. Just us, the snow, and the dog. Rachel, do you want to marry me tonight, here and now?" Rachel cried openly then, happy tears sliding down her cheeks and catching the candlelight. There was no doubt in her mind. No fear of the age gap, no worry about what people would say. Only certainty. "Yes," she said, with a voice that came out strong and clear from her chest. "Yes, James. Yes to everything. Yes to you." The ceremony was brief, stripped of any unnecessary artifice. There was no music, save for the distant sound of wind howling outside the glass walls and the soft bubbling of the indoor pond. Mr. Abernethy spoke softly about mature love, comparing marriage to a garden, something that requires patience, light, and knowing how to protect each other from the sudden frosts of life. Then came the moment for the vows. James pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly, but he barely looked at it. His eyes didn't leave Rachel's face. "Rachel," he began, his voice cracking for a moment with emotion. "I know sometimes the world insists on reminding us of the numbers, the years, the differences. But you have taught me that love is timeless. You are the bravest person I know. You are capable of creating beauty with words and with your hands. You have taught me that love isn't a youthful, ephemeral explosion, but a daily construction. A choice." James took a deep breath, stroking her knuckles with his thumb to steady himself. "I promise to be your refuge when you are tired. I promise to make you laugh when your mind worries too much about the future. I promise to love your curves, your silences, and your stories. I promise that, as long as I live, you will never have to face a blank page alone. You are my home, Rachel. I love you." Rachel, who had nothing written, spoke directly from her overflowing heart. James ... "You came into my life when I thought my romantic story had already had its ending. I thought my turn had passed. And you walked in with your boots full of mud and your boyish smile, and you rewrote the whole book. I was scared to love you. I was scared you'd notice I'm older, that I have baggage. But you took that baggage and carried it for me. You are my balance. You are my joy. I promise to trust you. I promise to stop trying to control the future and start living it with you. You are my north, James, and wherever you are is where I want to be." James took out 2 rings from his pocket, not the fancy engagement ones. 2 simple wedding bands, made of matte solid gold, warm to the touch and eternal. "With this ring, I take you as my wife," he said, sliding the gold onto her finger. "With this ring, I take you as my husband," she replied, doing the same, feeling the metal connect their lives forever. "I pronounce you husband and wife," said Mr. Abernethy, closing his book with a satisfied smile. "James, please kiss your wife." James didn't wait. He wrapped his arms around Rachel's waist, pulled her close until there was no space between their bodies, and kissed her. It was a deep, slow, passionate kiss. A kiss that tasted of salty tears, kept promises, and absolute victory over fear. Barnaby balked once, happily breaking the solemn spell and making them laugh amidst the kiss. There was no 5-course banquet or rigid protocol. The celebration was perfect in its imperfection. James had prepared a picnic-style dinner on the floor of the conservatory, piling up thick wool blankets and fluffy cushions. They sat cross-legged in their wedding finery, the silk of Rachel's dress pooling around her, eating with their hands. They ate imported cheeses, sweet grapes, crusty artisan bread, and a decadent, rich chocolate cake that James had secretly ordered from her favorite bakery. They drank vintage champagne straight from the bottle, tossing it back and forth, toasting to their madness and their freedom. Later, James connected his phone to a small portable speaker. The soft notes of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" filled the humid air. They stood up and danced barefoot on the Persian rugs. James spun her around, her champagne silk dress shimmering in the candlelight, reflecting the hundreds of tiny flames surrounding them. He held her close, humming the song in her ear, swaying gently. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the rest of the world. Inside, they were in their own universe. The night dissolved into laughter, whispered confidences, and kisses that tasted of chocolate and champagne. Christmas morning found them in the big bed in the cabin, tangled together under the thick down duvet. The winter sun streamed in through the window, bright and clear, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Rachel woke up first. She felt the heavy, comforting weight of James's arm thrown over her waist, anchoring her to reality. She lifted her hand and looked at it against the sunlight. The simple gold band shone next to her vintage engagement ring. It looked right, it looked permanent. She felt light. She felt finally at peace. Rachel thought, "This is what it feels like, no noise. No lists, no anxiety, just this. Just him. Just us." James shifted beside her, opening one green eye. Seeing her watching him, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face, the look of absolute happiness of someone waking up next to their favorite person in the world. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice husky with sleep and satisfaction. Rachel leaned in and kissed the tip of his nose. "Merry Christmas, husband," she replied. And so, in a snowy, forgotten corner of the world, Rachel and James gifted each other the ultimate luxury, the freedom to love in their own way, without scripts written by anyone else. They reminded us that love doesn't need an audience to be true, and that sometimes getting lost in the woods is the only way to truly find yourself. If this cozy love story, smelling of cinnamon, pine, and secret weddings warmed your heart, please give us a like. It helps the channel grow so we can keep telling stories that feel like a hug. Don't forget to subscribe to Cozy Romantic Stories by Marylena and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next tale, where love always finds its way home. And now, I want to know, would you be able to drop everything and elope for a secret wedding like Rachel and James, or are you loyal to the big traditional celebration? Tell me in the comments below. I'm reading you with a coffee in hand. Merry Christmas, and may your stories always be cozy.